Somewhere on August 13, 2018, my daughter Shanann Watts and her children were murdered.
For a man who's already endured so much, Frank Rusick says stop the internet insanity.
Cruelly abused, outright bullying, and on a daily basis.
Rusick reading a 2-page statement asking for a handful of internet videos and at least one song to cease.
Our family, including Shanann and her children and our grandchildren, have been ridiculed, demeaned, slandered, mocked in the most vicious ways you can imagine.
They are videos generating many views on different media platforms. Videos that reflect and in some cases try to revise what happened to his daughter and grandchildren a year ago August.
We have been subject to false accusations, fake Facebook accounts, hate speeches, and constant stream of ugly, evil insults and attacks.
He and his attorneys have asked to have the hurtful content removed. Now he's pleading to please let his family rest in peace and those left behind to be able to live in it.
Finally, to the people who have stood with us, who have supported us and prayed for us and our family. For Shanann and her grandchildren, we can't thank.
It begins with a silence so heavy, it feels like the walls themselves are holding their breath. 7 years have passed. Yet for Sean and Watts' parents, the memory of that morning still wakes them from sleep. The memory of the phone call, the panic in a friend's voice, the dread they felt before anyone used the word missing, before anyone imagined the nightmare unfolding in a quiet Colorado suburb. It was August 13, 2018, when Frederick police entered the Watts home. Body cam footage shows a bright, orderly house, clean counters, children's toys, and traces of a life built with intention. But beneath that mundane normalcy was an atmosphere that felt wrong. Too quiet, too empty, as if something had been ripped out of the home but the air hadn't recovered from the shock. Shanann's phone lay on the couch. Her purse sat neatly in the kitchen. Her shoes were by the door. Everything a woman carries with her, untouched. And her parents, thousands of miles away in North Carolina, were about to learn the truth no parent should ever hear. Before authorities found bodies, before the polygraph, before the infamous prison confessions, there was only a gnawing sense of dread, a mother's intuition screaming that something was terribly, fatally wrong. At that moment, no one suspected the soft-spoken husband. No one suspected the smiling father seen in countless family videos. No one suspected that the person who was supposed to protect Sean and Bella and Celeste had instead become the source of the darkness closing in around them. But Shanann's parents felt it. Even before the confession, even before the world turned their tragedy into a global obsession. 7 years later, they finally speak with clarity, revealing the warning signs, the lies, the manipulation, and the devastating truth about Chris Watts. A truth they say the world still hasn't fully understood. And this is where their story begins. Before the headlines, before the documentaries, before the public dissected every second of police footage, there was simply a family, a young couple trying to build something out of hope and second chances. Sean and Catherine Watts was a force of nature long before she ever crossed paths with Chris. Her parents remember her as a child who glowed with determination, someone who overcame illness, heartbreak, and disappointment with a stubborn kind of optimism. She believed in structure, in hard work, in building a home filled with warmth and security. Her online videos show a mother who adored her children, a wife who believed she was loved, and a woman who poured herself into creating stability for her family. But behind that strength was a deeper truth. Sean had fought for every good thing in her life. Nothing had come easy. Then there was Chris, quiet, unassuming, and steady on the surface. A man who rarely raised his voice, rarely showed anger, rarely allowed people to see what simmered beneath. To Shanann's parents, he seemed polite, almost overly polite, reserved to a fault, a mirror reflecting back whatever emotion someone expected him to show. They welcomed him into their family. They trusted him with their daughter's happiness. They believed, as so many did, that he was gentle. But looking back, the picture feels different. Shanann's mother recalls the moments when Chris was too still, too silent, as if emotions were something he mimicked rather than naturally expressed. Her father remembers times when Chris's eyes didn't match his smile. Small things at first, fleeting, easy to dismiss. But now, 7 years later, those memories feel like shadows pointing toward the truth they didn't know they should fear. Shanann and Chris built their life quickly. Marriage, a home, 2 daughters, and the announcement of a 3rd child. To the outside world, they were picture perfect. The smiling family in matching outfits, recording milestones, holiday mornings, and giggling toddlers. But perfection is fragile. Inside that carefully curated image were cracks no one saw widening. Financial stress, emotional distance, a growing sense of imbalance. Where Shanann had always been the planner, the communicator, the dreamer, while Chris drifted further into a quiet shell. Yet she loved him, deeply, fiercely. Her parents knew this. She believed Chris was her partner, her protector, the father her children deserved. What she didn't know, what her parents couldn't have predicted, was that as she built a life, Chris was quietly dismantling it in the shadows. He wasn't just withdrawing, he was changing. His demeanor, once calm, began to feel hollow. His late nights became more frequent. His phone, once left casually on tables and counters, now became something he shielded with unusual vigilance. Her parents noticed shifting tones in their daughter's voice. The fatigue, the unease. Not enough to raise alarms, but enough to create an ache they still struggle to describe. Because while Shanann was fighting for her marriage, Chris was building a double life. One that would eventually collide with the one she worked so hard to hold together. The tragedy that followed didn't happen in a moment. It grew slowly, silently, in the spaces between who Chris pretended to be and who he truly was. And for Shanann's parents, understanding that truth is part of the pain that still lingers 7 years later. The red flags did not appear all at once. They came quietly, like shadows slipping under a door. So subtle at first that even attentive parents like Frank and Sandy Razusek could not piece them together until it was too late. It began with Shanann's voice, not the confident, bright tone she shared in her videos, but the softer, more uncertain voice she used when speaking to her mother. A voice that hinted at something shifting beneath the surface of her marriage. At first, it sounded like exhaustion, pregnancy fatigue, the pressure of work, the endless cycle of parenting. But her mother sensed something else, something she couldn't name. Then came Chris's physical transformation. He was losing weight, gaining muscle, changing his wardrobe, changing his grooming habits. He looked like a man trying to reinvent himself. To the world, self-improvement seemed harmless, even admirable. But to Shanann, and to her parents watching from a distance, it felt like he was drifting away from the life he had once claimed to cherish. There were days when he seemed detached from his daughters. Moments captured in videos where he appeared present but not engaged, smiling but not connected. The girls adored him, yet sometimes his responses seemed rehearsed, as if parental affection was a role he'd learned, not a feeling he lived. Shanann's parents noticed the way she always tried to fill the silence in conversations, especially when Chris was nearby. His growing emotional distance created a space she desperately kept trying to bridge. Then came the business trip to North Carolina. Turning point. Something changed during that trip. A shift Shanann felt but couldn't decipher. Her parents saw the worry in her eyes during FaceTime calls. Saw the tension she tried to hide. She was pregnant, overwhelmed, and more alone than she had ever been in her marriage. Chris's behavior became unpredictable. Cold one moment, distant the next. Then suddenly affectionate in a way that felt forced. Mechanical. Shanann's parents later said it was as though he was trying to mask a secret he couldn't fully control. Their daughter sensed it too. She texted friends. She documented her worries. She tried to understand what was happening. But Chris did not shut her out gently. He shut her out completely. What her parents didn't know, what the world didn't know, was that while Shanann was searching for answers, Chris was already living a parallel life. A life filled with late-night phone calls, hidden photos, and romantic fantasies with another woman. A life where he could be whoever he wanted because no one knew the truth. Shanann's parents now see the red flags with brutal clarity. His sudden protectiveness over his phone, the secretive spending, the unexplained emotional freeze, the calculated detachment from his own family. At the time, they were fragments, pieces that didn't fit together yet. Their daughter believed her marriage was salvageable. She believed Chris was simply stressed. But the truth was much darker. Chris wasn't struggling with the marriage. He was erasing himself from it. He wasn't unsure of his role as a father. He was stepping away from it. And he wasn't confused about his future. He was constructing a new one without his family. A future that would require crossing a line so unthinkable, so monstrous, that even today, 7 years later, Shanann's parents struggle to understand how they never saw the full picture forming in the dark. The red flags had been there. They just didn't know they were red until the bloodshed revealed their true color. In the early hours of August 13, 2018, while the world slept in quiet innocence, the Watts home became the setting of a horror that still chills the nation. It happened in silence, so silent that even the neighbors, only feet away, never heard a sound. No scream. No struggle, no warning, only darkness. Shanann had just returned home from a business trip. She walked into her house exhausted, pregnant, and hopeful that the morning would bring clarity to a marriage she didn't know had already crumbled beyond repair. She never expected that the man she had built a life with, the man she trusted to protect her, was waiting with a decision already carved into his mind. Chris would later describe the moment as something that just happened. But investigators, therapists, and even his own family would say there is no such thing as just happened when it comes to an act like this. Inside that house, something irreversible took place. The details are known. They are documented. But to hear them spoken by Shanann's parents, 7 years later, is to feel the breath leave the room. Their daughter, a pregnant mother who lived her life with purpose and devotion, was taken in the most unimaginable way, by someone who never showed a hint of violence, by someone who once kissed her forehead with loving familiarity. The crime did not end there. 2 little girls, Bella and Celeste, children who saw their father as their protector, became victims of the same darkness. The house that had once been filled with laughter, bedtime stories, and tiny footsteps became the final place they ever felt fear, confusion, and betrayal. What breaks Shanann's parents the most is not just the brutality of the crime. It's the betrayal of trust, the betrayal of love, the betrayal of fatherhood. Chris did not act in a moment of panic. He acted with decisions, sequential, purposeful, controlled. He transported the bodies to an oil site where he worked, the place where he believed he could hide the truth forever. A remote field under the Colorado sun, quiet and isolated, where he thought no one would ever look. But even there, the cruelty continued. The way he left them, the way he tried to bury his guilt beneath layers of dirt and industrial steel, the way he drove back into the neighborhood later that morning, breathing the same air as the people who trusted him. To Shanann's parents, the crime was not just a moment. It was a transformation. Their son-in-law had shed the skin of a father and husband and revealed something hollow, frightening, and unrecognizable. The world would learn the details in forensic reports. The police would uncover the truth through technology, neighbor footage, and Chris's unraveling lies. But for her parents, understanding the crime was like living through a nightmare that had no waking point. Because the moment their daughter and granddaughters died, the world changed forever. And nothing, no confession, no trial, no sentence, could restore what was taken inside that house. A crime born in silence, committed without mercy, remembered with unbearable grief. And 7 years later, the people who loved Shanann and most still search for the answer to one haunting question. How could a man capable of love become capable of this? In the hours after the murders, Chris Watts didn't behave like a man devastated by the disappearance of his family. He behaved like a man racing against time, patching lies together as quickly as his reality was falling apart. Every movement he made was calculated. Every word, rehearsed. Every gesture, a carefully crafted mask. He backed his truck into the garage, a move he never did unless he was loading tools. He walked in and out of the house with an unsettling calmness. He texted Shanann's phone repeatedly, messages he knew she would never read. He performed concern. He performed panic. He performed innocence. But the performance cracked almost immediately. Shanann's friend arrived at the house first, and her instincts were sharp. She knew Shanann. She knew her habits. She knew that a missing phone, purse, medication, and children's blankets were not just odd, they were impossible. She called the police, and suddenly, Chris's cover-up was no longer a private act. It was on camera. The body cam footage remains one of the most analyzed pieces of true crime history. Chris stood stiff, arms crossed, voice steady, eyes darting. He looked less like a man searching for his family and more like a man trying to control a fire that was already burning through his lies. Inside the house, the officers found no signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle, no signs of a wife who had packed up and left. Instead, they found a home frozen in time. Shanann's life paused mid-sentence. But the investigation's turning point came from a neighbor's surveillance system. The screen flickered. The footage played. And there it was, Chris backing his truck up, pacing frantically, loading something heavy, his body language restless and erratic. The neighbor watched with narrowed eyes and whispered the words Chris never expected to hear. "He's not acting right." Instantly, the officers took note. From that moment, Chris wasn't just a grieving husband. He was a suspect. The investigation then shifted into high gear. GPS data from Chris's truck. Phone records showing deleted messages. Search history filled with new beginnings and fantasies without his family. Late-night conversations with Nicole Kessinger, conversations he tried to erase. But digital footprints don't disappear. They embed themselves into timelines. And investigators followed them like a trail of breadcrumbs leading to the truth. Drones spotted disturbed earth near the oil tanks. Search teams unearthed the bodies. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable, damning. Chris's story began to unravel. His lies contradicted each other. His explanations grew thinner. His mask slipped. Then came the polygraph. He walked into the room with confidence, a confidence that stunned the examiner. He failed every question, comprehensively, absolutely. When confronted with the truth, he didn't confess to murder. He told yet another lie, one meant to shift blame onto Shanann. A final act of cruelty, an attempt to rewrite the narrative even in the face of undeniable evidence. But the investigators had everything they needed. Every digital trace, every piece of physical evidence, every contradiction spoken by a man collapsing under the weight of his own deception. The cover-up was over. The truth was coming. And Shanann's parents, watching from afar, were experiencing a horror no parent should ever endure. What Chris tried to bury beneath dirt, oil, and lies was rising to the surface. By the time the case reached the courtroom, the world already knew Chris Watts as a husband who murdered his pregnant wife and 2 young daughters. Yet the legal proceedings were not just about presenting evidence. They were about confronting a man who had shattered every expectation of trust, fatherhood, and humanity. Chris entered the courtroom with the same eerie calmness he carried from the moment the investigation began. No tears, no visible remorse, just a blank expression that seemed to echo the emotional void investigators had described. It was as if the gravity of his actions never fully reached him, or he refused to let it in. The district attorney laid out the case with precision. Premeditation, manipulation, a hidden double life built on lies and deceit. Each charge was a mirror held up to Chris's darkest impulses. But then came the moment that stunned the world. Chris Watts pleaded guilty to all 9 counts, avoiding a trial. There would be no jury deliberation, no testimonies, no long battle in court. The plea deal was designed to spare Shanann's parents the agony of reliving every detail, and they accepted it with heavy hearts. Yet, as the charges were read aloud, 5 counts of murder, 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased body. The courtroom grew colder. Reporters described the atmosphere as suffocating, like the air itself was trying to escape the horror of the words echoing across the room. Then came the sentencing. The judge condemned Chris to the harshest penalty possible without the death sentence. 5 life sentences, 3 consecutive and 2 concurrent, plus 48 additional years. It was a punishment designed to ensure he would never walk as a free man again. But the most devastating moment wasn't the sentencing. It was the victim impact statements. Shanann's family stood in the courtroom, trembling with grief. Their voices cracked, but their words were steady. They spoke of a daughter stolen, grandchildren erased, a future shattered beyond repair. They spoke of trust betrayed by someone they once welcomed into their home with love and open arms. And as they poured their heartbreak into the room, Chris barely reacted. No tears, no breakdown, only the faintest tightening of his jaw, as if the only emotion he could manage was discomfort at being confronted with the truth. When the judge finally delivered the sentence, he spoke with unmistakable contempt, calling Chris's actions the most inhumane and vicious crime he had ever seen in his entire career. The gavel fell. Chris was escorted out. And in that moment, Shanann's parents felt both relief and devastation. Justice had been served, but their family was still gone. The finality of the sentencing didn't bring closure. It brought a new kind of pain. The kind that settles into the bones and stays there for years. The kind that makes the world look different, colder, less forgiving. And now, 7 years later, Shanann's parents are finally ready to speak the truth. Not the one written in court documents, but the truth they lived through, the truth that haunts them still. Here is Chapter 7 plus the final conclusion and CTA, written in the same dark, cinematic tone you requested. If you'd like an optional Chapter 8 teaser, I can create that too. Chapter 7, Family and Community Reaction. In the weeks that followed the sentencing, the shock that had rippled through Frederick, Colorado, began to settle into something heavier. An ache, a disbelief that lingered in living rooms, churches, and classrooms. People looked at the Watts home and saw not a house, but a tomb of unanswered questions. A reminder that evil can hide behind smiles, family photos, and polite conversations in the driveway. But for Shanann's parents, the aftermath was something far more personal, something that didn't fade with time or distance. They weren't just the grieving relatives in a headline. They were parents waking up to a world where their daughter's laughter was gone, where the voices of Bella and Celeste were frozen in memories and home videos, where baby Nico would never take a first breath. For them, the world had split cleanly into 2 timelines, before August 13, 2018, and everything after. In the months following the murders, they faced an onslaught of attention. News outlets, interview requests, messages from strangers, and the ache of watching their story unfold across the internet. Some offered kindness, others offered cruelty. But through it all, Shanann's parents held on to one purpose: protecting the memory of their daughter and grandchildren. They released photos, shared stories, and built a narrative that reminded the world of who Shanann was. Not the woman Chris attempted to smear in his lies. Not the caricature that online speculation tried to create, but the real Shanann, driven, loving, ambitious, fiercely protective of her children. Communities across the country rallied around them, sending letters, donations, and memorial tributes. Vigil candles flickered across neighborhoods far from Colorado. Strangers whispered prayers under their breath. And for a moment, it felt like the world stepped closer, forming a silent circle around a grieving family. But even in this wave of support, the pain didn't ease. Shanann's mother later admitted that she still hears her daughter's voice. She hears Bella's laughter. She sees Celeste's bright smile. She imagines the life they should have lived, and the life Chris destroyed in a single monstrous act. 7 years later, their grief hasn't softened. It has sharpened, focused, transformed into something they now speak openly about. And now, after nearly a decade of reliving every detail, every lie, every painful memory, They are finally telling the truth about Chris Watts. The truth they believe the world needs to hear. The truth buried behind the calm exterior of a man who fooled everyone. Except them. Because they saw warning signs long before the world did. And now they're pulling back the curtain. 7 years later, the shadow of the Watts murders still stretches across 2 families, a community, and countless people who watched the case unfold. Shanann's parents continue to speak, not because they want attention, but because silence allows lies to grow. They refuse to let their daughter's story be rewritten. They refuse to let their grandchildren be forgotten. And they refuse to let Chris Watts hide behind his charm, his calm demeanor, or the myth of a momentary snap. Their truth may not bring them peace. It may not erase their suffering. But it ensures the world never forgets the cruelty that masqueraded as love, and the innocence that was taken far too soon. So now we ask you, what do you think Shanann's parents still see in this case that the world refuses to acknowledge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story gripped you, as all Shadows of Deceit do, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who follows true crime, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, so you never miss the next investigation into the darkest corners of human behavior. This is Shadow of Deceit, where the truth always finds a way out of the dark.